right, and we are live. I'm joined here today by Nathan Sage. He's a Democrat running for the U.S. Senate seat in Iowa, challenging the Republican incumbent Joni Ernst next year in the midterms. Nathan, thanks for being on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask you about, quite a few different things today, labor rights, healthcare, climate change, but I can't really barely lead here. We have to start with talking about Donald Trump and what's going on in our country right now. You running for a federal seat, I think, is just the most important topic in the room, right? So, Donald Trump is kind of doing a lot of blatantly illegal things right now. And, a lot of members of Congress, it seems like, are not really kind of like meeting this moment. Now, we are seeing more Democrats step up recently, but for the most part, they're kind of treating this as like business as usual. And when I talk to people, it seems like the number one thing people keep asking over and over again are like, where are the Democrats right now? And this is after we're seeing Donald Trump kind of like hand the keys over to Elon Musk, and he is illegally raiding our treasury, going after Social Security information. This is also while Donald Trump is threatening different countries, saying that he's going to take their territory from them: Denmark, Panama, Canada, Palestine, deporting people, to other like countries into torture prisons without any due process, and then arresting judges who are essentially, openly defying him and not doing whatever he demands of them. So I would say that the number one question I have to ask you as we start this conversation off is, if you are elected to be a U.S. Senator, how will you use the power of that position to combat what is happening with the Trump regime right now?
It's interesting you say that, being a single senator, the way you look at it, it's like you don't have a lot of power. You have to have that power in numbers. I think what you need to do is you need to be honest, like I am, be blunt, honest about what's going on. Don't hide. The people want somebody out in front leading. They want somebody telling them, where to be, what to do, how to act. And I think what you do is you protest like you're supposed to. You stand up to the people that you're supposed to stand up to. You bring people together in this moment and understand, like, these are the steps that we can do. These are some of the things we do. And anything that you can do in that scenario, you do. So if you can get in the way, if you can delay process, if you can cause, I don't want to say cause havoc, you don't want to cause the havoc, but if you can stand up and fight for what you believe in, that's what people want. They want to see that. And, if that's a week ago, I was at Mason City, my hometown, speaking at a protest there, rallying the troops. And that's what we need to do. I think people need to understand, like, there's more of us together than there are divided. So if we can come together and understand that we have rights as people, and the people need to stand up and have a voice, I'll be there to support that and do what I can. But from a federal level, you got to work with people. You got to unite with people. I know the Democratic side of things, they're going to do all they can together, but I think it's being blunt, honest with what's going on and making it as transparent of what's going on, and understanding, like, this is why elections have consequences. And this is why, like, when you have a Republican like Joni Ernst that toes the line and confirms Pete Hegseth and continues to do the corporate bidding of Elon Musk and major corporations, this is the result of that. And this is why somebody like me, a working class individual, coming in there and understanding the where the working class is and where we're suffering and where we're trying to work, that's why that's so important. And like I said, elections have consequences, and we're seeing that. But we got to do what we can to continue to stay united, keep, I like to say, a united front, and do everything in our power to make it harder for him to wreak havoc. I think it's almost like when you saw Elon out there with the chainsaw. That's what it seems like the government is going through right now, is just somebody with a chainsaw trying to cut it down.
Yeah, and a lot of people, are rightfully really worried about what's going to happen next. Now, you talk about having to work with people in Washington. It's a question I really keep coming back to is, can you work with the Republican Party right now? Like, you are running in the state of Iowa to try to get to the U.S. Senate. This is a state that's going more and more red, it seems like, every single election right now. When you're going to be making your pitch to the people of Iowa about why they should send you there over Joni Ernst, like, how do you bridge the gap in your own state to convince people that, you deserve to take that seat?
So I think when it comes to it, the working class, especially the people that are stuck in the middle, I truly believe that most Iowans are somewhere in the middle going, like, well, this is a little crazy and this is a little crazy. Like that's the blunt answer I can give you. And I think that the one thing that we all can agree on is life should not be the way it is right now. It feels like you wake up and it's a dream. And everybody is in that working class is literally suffering, trying to survive. So I believe Trump was elected mainly because he talked about lowering prices of groceries. He talked about lowering costs, doing all he could to make life easier for people, especially coming out of inflation. And we have not seen that, right? And I
Right.
think that that's where that common ground is between Democrats and Republicans is like, we're all in this together. We're all suffering together. We all want a better life. And talking to people about how we can make their life better now, not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, but right now, I think is important for Iowans. And I think can bridge that gap because I think there's, like I said, I think there's a lot of people that are in the middle going, yeah, well, I don't really believe in this, but I want somebody that was going to fight for me to have a better wage and fight for me to have better health care and fight for me to the cost of living to be a little bit easier. And I think that will bring people together, knowing that we're into this together and we're all suffering together, as opposed to, cultural issues here and there. I think most people are in that area of going, you know what, we need somebody that's going to help us now. And we are suffering. We're trying to put food on the table. Egg prices are crazy. Toilet paper is crazy. Everything seems to be crazy. And we want somewhere where it's a stable environment where we can understand that we have an opportunity to, send our kids to college or send our kids to a trade school and give our kids even basic necessities like food. And I think, somebody like me that's been through that understands it a little bit more. And I think that's why I'm able to speak on it more and around the people that I'm around. I'm in a very Republican county, and I think I can talk to Republicans a lot easier because I understand kind of what they're facing. Being a chamber director, I understand I'm working with small businesses, and a lot of them are suffering and trying just to keep their business afloat. It's the same kind of rhetoric. They're trying to just survive right now, and I feel like there's just a lot of us that want some help and aren't getting it. And major people are starting to see that divide between major corporations and billionaires and the rest of us, and understanding that
Right.
we are not getting the help that we need, and we need somebody to fight for us.
Yeah, and I think there are so many different conversations that branch off of that, and
Yeah.
I definitely have a couple more questions about Donald Trump, for you. But I kind of wanted like to talk to you quickly about your time in the military and then kind of like corollating that with what we're seeing right now from the Secretary of Defense. I saw recently that you kind of came out and talked about our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on Instagram recently in a post, a few different slides there. I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts about the current job of the Secretary of Defense? That he's kind of embroiled in scandal right now with chats being in Signal that shouldn't be there, his denial of them. But when you see the Secretary of Defense kind of like acting the way that he has been, and your time, in the military as a veteran, how do you feel about the job that he's doing right now?
It is blatantly clear, and I think a lot of people are seeing this, that he is not qualified for the position he's in.
Yeah,
I know he's doing the bidding of Donald Trump, and it just reflects back on Joni Ernst, who was that confirmation vote to get him in there. Somebody
yeah,
like Joni, who's a veteran, who's been to Kuwait and done what she's done, would know right off the bat that he was underqualified. And for me, you know, one thing that really stood out for me when I was in Iraq, all three of the times I was in Iraq, if somebody was hurt, if somebody was killed, if there was a major issue going on, or even if like we were getting ready to come back and we were trying to communicate with our families, like, hey, we're going to be coming back at this time. If any of that ever got out, they shut down the internet. They shut down everything. They didn't allow us to have those
yeah,
conversations. And here we are, the Secretary of Defense on his phone is texting everybody war plans, his family, things that you're just being inappropriate and not. I mean, it's dangerous at the end of the day. I mean, you're setting up troops for failure. You're causing more havoc by disregarding blatant like procedures that you're
yeah,
supposed to be following instead of you're being irrational and you're being wrong, and I think it's insane that he is still in the position he's in. If I were in his shoes and I did something like that, I'd automatically resign, knowing that I'm underqualified to be in that position. And that's not going to happen. Trump and them they're gonna double down on what they always double down on. They never apologize for anything. They just continue to do this, and people and the troops now will continue to suffer. And I think it's wrong. It's incredibly wrong. And I have absolutely no respect for him or at this point for Joni for confirming that. And I we're in this position because of that. And I think I'm actually more scared of what could come after this, what we'll end up finding out, or what other dumb things he could do. Because if he's allowed to get away with doing stuff like this, he'll continue to be the way he is and put our troops at risk.
You know what? Putting the troops at risk is definitely the kind of the next place I wanted to go with this. So I'm also worried about lack of accountability, not just for the Secretary of Defense, but also for Donald Trump. And we just had someone in the comments there saying that, we what was I'm sorry here. Yeah, Hegseth put our service members in danger. That is kind of something that I'm seeing as a reoccurring theme here from this administration, because now we are seeing that Donald Trump has come out and said things of the nature of he's willing to bomb Iran. He said specifically that if they did not agree to the deal that he would like them to agree to, that he would strike them militarily. This is also after Donald Trump talked about going into Gaza with the military. Completely forcibly displacing the entire population and then literally building golden statues of himself. And then this is also while he is bombing the country of Yemen. So my question to you is, as a former member of the military, a veteran, how dangerous is what the president is doing right now when it comes to the Middle East? It feels like we're on the precipice of being like drug into another Middle Eastern war. And forgive me for saying this, but it feels like this one, something with Iran, for instance, would actually be more dangerous than anything that happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. But what are your thoughts on this?
It is. I agree. It is. It is very dangerous. It comes down to, like, I always think of like a bully on a schoolyard, right? When there's a bully that runs his mouth a lot, or teases kids a lot, or does what he wants a lot, eventually that bully gets knocked down, right? Or eventually that bully gets punched in the mouth, and he stammers back and doesn't know what to expect because he's never got that before. I'm not going to say that's going to happen. What I'm saying is I feel like there's a lot of people that are a lot of countries that are seeing what he's saying and are not happy about it, and it just causes more issues as opposed to, obviously I'm against endless wars. I served 3 tours, almost 2.5 years of my life in Iraq, and I'm against those endless wars. And so for me, it's like, I think there's a little bit more of a diplomatic approach you can have to this. There's other ways to negotiate and get things across to people. But sounding like a bully and sounding arrogant, or however he is sounding, I don't believe is the right approach. And again, like you said, I think that causes that issue where troops are having to be more on edge and being ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Thankful the Marine Corps is good at that. But they have to be ready all the time, because now you have almost like a ticking time bomb as your commander in chief. That you don't know what he's going to instigate tomorrow. You don't know what could potentially come off of the things he said tomorrow. So you're always on edge. You're always ready to go, and it makes it where it's like, even when you're in garrison, even when you're home, you're still waiting for the next call of, hey, you're going to have to go, because of something that you would assume could be handled diplomatically is not being handled that way, and is just a bully on a schoolyard, and people are trying to fight because he said the dumbest things he possibly could say. So I just feel like, if you're going to put troops at risk, like, it's easier when you're in the military to know you're watching the diplomatic process come out, as opposed to, like, hey, our president's mad at this dictator, or he's mad at this guy this week. We got to get ready to deploy, and that constant up and down of not knowing what's going to come next is hard for troops when it comes to readiness, and hard. It's very hard for morale, because you're constantly wondering, like, hey, am I going to say goodbye to my wife today and fly over this day, or am I going to actually have a normal life?
So I kind of want to start like bringing the conversation a little bit back to domestic politics for a second here. I do have one more question for you when it comes to abroad stuff. We'll talk about domestic things really quickly. So you had mentioned that you were a really big opponent of labor rights, like here in the country for the working class. The first thing that comes to my mind, and there's a million different issues that we can touch on with labor issues, but the first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that since 2009, the federal minimum wage has been $7.25. Now, since then, we've had two Republican administrations and two Democratic administrations, and that has remained unchanged. Even during the last administration, there was a small effort to get the minimum wage bumped up to $15 an hour, but it was kind of quickly snuffed out and never revisited again. So the first thing I would ask you is, if you are elected to be a U.S. Senator in the state of Iowa, would you bring a bill to the floor to raise the minimum wage up to just pick a good number? It could be, 17, 18, 20, whatever you think it needs to be. Will you bring a bill to the floor to actually raise the minimum wage federally across the land?
Absolutely, without question. I think that, when it comes to it, I think it's a travesty that it hasn't been raised this whole time. It obviously has not gone with inflation, and it has not gone with the cost of living. And I think that that's something that we definitely need to look at. And it's amazing to me that it hasn't been. And the argument that you always get, the complaint that you always get, is the, oh well, that's going to drive up cost, right? That's going to cost you. You raise money, they're going to. I want people to understand that a worker makes this much, $7. The CEO that he is working for makes 330% more than them. So really, the actuality is they're just being greedy, and there's no other way to describe it than just being greedy. And so for my thing is yeah, is there ways we can lower costs and hopefully help with that? Yeah, we can go through policy, through taxation. There's different ways to make it where the cost won't go up as far. But that, at the end of the day, the fact that it has still been 725 or whatever it is now for so long is just irresponsible from a government standpoint. And I think that we should be doing more for the working class. You got a lot of people in our country that are living literally I think it's over 60% of us living paycheck to paycheck just to survive. And we're supposed to be the most prosperous, the richest country on the face of the earth. Yeah. And yet over half of our population is struggling. And so I understand that, cost, we got to balance that out. But at the end of the day, it's all corporate greed that is causing the problems we're having. The rich continue to get richer. And, we got to do what we can to bring that gap back closer. And actually in the 1930s, that's what they did when costs were high, the billionaires and everybody was making a lot of money. They ended up redistributing that back into the lower middle class. That's how we had unemployment compensation. That's when we came out of the Social Security. That's when we started redistributing that back into the lower middle class. And that's exactly what I think we need now to balance this back out. And we can start with the minimum wage, because that's something that should have been updated a long time ago.
So, just a quick curiosity question for you. Why do you think that it has kind of been stuck this way for so long? I mean, like, I have a bunch of different theories on why I think that the minimum wage has kind of remained stagnant, stuck where it is. But, this is something that we don't even really see Democrats going after. Like, it seems like the most basic kind of home run issue that they could just go after. I mean, even if it was a symbolic gesture, bringing a bill to the floor and forcing the Republicans to vote against it, or forcing them to not let the vote be had in the first place. But we don't even see that. So, like, what do you think is actually going on, like, behind the scenes for the reason why this issue has been so stagnant for so long?
Well, you got it on both sides. You have it on a Republican side, you have a Democrat side, where they're taking money from corporations, or they're taking money from richer people. And, I'm not one of those. I don't take any corporate money, and we don't take any of that. So it's harder for us to run. It's harder for us to do what we're doing. But at the end of the day, I think it's better for everybody, because, when you're looking at it, 2% of Washington D.C. comes from the working class, only 98% of it. So they are going to continue to make the laws and policies that benefit them. That's what they've done for 50 plus years, 60 years, however long. They're going to keep making those. So to get to where we're trying to get, and to get in cost to like our minimum wage to go up and cost to go down, you need people like myself from the working class to be in the Senate or be in the Congress to be able to make those laws, because we understand what people are going through. It's easy for my drill instructor in boot camp used to always say, throwing snowballs from the cheap seats. It's easy for politicians, especially from the right, to be able to throw snowballs from the cheap seats when they're not living that life and they don't understand what's going on. And I think that at the end of the day, a lot of these politicians continue to answer to their special interests. They continue to answer to these corporations, and they're continuing to understand that the only way they're going to get the money they're getting for their campaigns and doing what they're doing is by keeping the status quo. And that is wrong. That is insanely wrong. And I think, again, one of the bigger issues with that is, as well, is everybody's always, like I said, they're scared of the cost going up. You hear that. That's the talking point. Well, if you raise this, the costs are going to go up. Well, there's ways we can tax against that. There's policies we can do to make it where that doesn't happen, and we can combat that at the same time. And I think that's what we need to do. Is if we're in the, like, the reason I'm running, the reason I'm doing what I'm doing, at the end of the day, I really truly care about helping people. Like that's I know that people have said that 9 million times to Sunday, but that's how I am. I know how hard life is, and that's what I'm working for. And That's what needs to be done. If you're looking to help somebody, you start in their pocketbook. You start giving them a little bit more compensation for the things they're doing, and making healthcare easier, making costs come down a little bit where they can afford life again. And those are areas that we can do. We can maybe we can't necessarily offset what the corporations are going to do by raising costs, but if we can lower healthcare at the same time, we can lower childcare costs at the same time. It can balance it out a little bit more as well. But we just got to think outside the box and not try to do the same thing. Definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. We got to try something different, and that's why I'm here.
Yeah, that is kind of like what I want to talk to you about next, is like doing something a little bit different. You know, I think for me, I've been looking at labor rights more and more over the last couple of years while I've been doing independent thought, while I've been looking at just like the landscape. I've come to the personal, I guess, end place that unions are some of the most important things that we can have here in the country. At in times where politicians just relentlessly are failing us, not really meeting the moment. This happens in both parties, but I think obviously more in the Republican Party. Unions are something that I find to be a necessary, thing in our lives. They are a way for us to kind of like protect ourselves from the greed of the corporations. They allow people to come together and collectively bargain for their rights, withholding their labor. I think it's the most powerful thing that we can do right now. For you, particularly, what are some other kind of like working class, I guess, labor rights related issues that you would like to see come across if you were elected to the Senate? And also, are there specific protections or other kind of things that you want to add in order to help unions maybe like thrive a little bit more or at least maintain what they have?
Yeah, I definitely want to make sure that unions are taken care of. I will fight every day for unions. My thing about unions, I feel like from a military aspect, they are on the front lines. They are fighting every day for workers' rights. They're
Yeah.
doing all they can for the people that they represent. But when it comes to union, when unions get better benefits, I think all of us, all the working class, generally gets better benefits because they understand. That's what we need to do is take care of them. One thing that really always stood out to me and still sticks out to me is paid sick leave. Like I think the United States needs paid sick leave across the board, because especially we're talking about coming out of a pandemic 5 years ago and not have a lot of these unions and a lot of people don't have paid sick leave to this day. I think that's insane, because you know if we're trying to have we got labeled all essential workers. You're an essential worker and you're an essential worker. Yeah, well, if they get sick, they don't get paid, and it makes it harder for them to. So you want to have the working class be able to survive even when they're fighting a pandemic, even when they're fighting a recession, even when they're doing all they can. They need to have the ability to do that. And I think that's one thing that I would definitely start with is paid sick leave. I think that's a major thing. But then you're looking at right now with Donald Trump and taking away rights to collective bargain and taking away rights to organize and rights to negotiate. I think what my plan is to do is I one thing that I know is I'm going to talk to the unions themselves and be like, I'm going to bring what I want to do is bring unions to the table, bring farmers to the table, bring working class people to the table, and go, what are some of the things that you want or need right now to make your workers' lives better? And understand, I'm going to speak to the expert on that as opposed to just saying things off the top of my head or saying what I think needs to be had. I'm going to talk to the experts about it and get their opinion back. But I think, again, my biggest thing is I want to start with paid sick leave and then also paid maternity leave. I think there's a lot of people out there. There's a lot of families out there, not just for wives, but for husbands too, able to raise their family and raise their firstborn child or raise their child together. I think that's a huge thing because I'm a big person. I'm a big proponent about a family. I think a family unit is important, both dad, mom, two moms, two dads, whatever it is. I believe that, it's a very important time for a kid. For me, I left my daughter when she was 2 years old when I went to Iraq, came back when she was 3, and it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life. Trying to talk to a kid via Skype on your computer or whatever is one of the hardest taxing things. But we start with things like that, where you talk about paid sick leave, we talk about paid maternity leave, what we can do to make sure women are taken care of when they are going through pregnancy, as well as everybody getting sick. I think those are two areas to start off with. But again, that's just my opinion. I'm going to bring the union reps in. I'm going to bring working class individuals in to help make those decisions before I go forward with anything.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I think this is so important is just because of the cost burden, effect that everyone is kind of feeling right now amongst basically everywhere in America, right?
Yep.
I mean, inflation is kind of crushing people, and so everyone's trying to figure out like how they can be paired fairly for the work that they're doing. And I think kind of like along those same lines, we're talking about trying to make sure that people are a little less cost burdened. This is the next thing I want to talk to you about is it feels like one of the number one reasons that people are cost burdened, besides, the everyday purchase that we have to make is also the price of, healthcare that people are facing around the country, right? I mean, the number one cause of, bankruptcy in America is medical debt. And given everything that we've seen in this country recently, especially with the shooting of the United Healthcare CEO and Luigi Mangione, there is a lot of conversations in the country still about the price of healthcare, about why we don't have universal healthcare. See a lot of Democrats kind of like talk about like how we need to have more access to healthcare, but then also kind of back away from the idea of saying like, hey, we need universal healthcare because there's a lot of money in that industry, right? So I guess I want to know your feelings on this. Does our country need universal healthcare? Would you advocate for it, or what are your thoughts as far as like trying to help more people have access to healthcare in the country?
So I would advocate for universal health care because I'm a veteran. That's what the VA is. Is
Yeah,
now obviously there are issues with the VA, but that is also because there's people stripping money out of it, not a lot of money going into it, not a lot of the money that needs to go into it. My thought is, we have it down from the VA perspective of understanding what we need, but again, you're dealing with bureaucracy, with the money coming in, trying to figure it out. I think again, if you can tax the upper 1% that would help pay for this, or
right,
make it where the rich are paying their fair share, or even just the tax they owed, would eventually pay for this in itself. And obviously, when you start it, when say start a system, but when you create it and when you go with it, there's going to be bugs in the system. There might be delays in certain things, but at the end of the day, I feel like it's a right for us as Americans, again, in the richest country in the world, to be able to, if I get sick, not go in debt. If I get
yeah.
cancer, not go in debt. I'm already fighting cancer. I should not be fighting, bills to be able to get there. And, I think healthcare is a right for us. And I believe that a lot of people struggle. I think one of the biggest reasons why there's a lot like the cost, I'm not cost, but the average lifespan is gone down is because I think there's a lot of people that don't get seen when they can go get seen, because when they should go get seen because they're terrified of the cost. My daughter broke her finger in like November, and I was like, man, we're going to get a bill. And of course, you got to get x-rays, you got to get it checked. And it wasn't that bad. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that can't incur that cost. So they just don't get checked, and they allow
Right.
those problems to continue on. And I think even if it's a universal healthcare and you have delays and you have issues, like you're going to have bugs in the system until they're worked out. It's a work in progress. That's what's going to happen. I think it
Yeah.
would be better, that would be better than going broke just trying to survive.
I could not agree more. And just for those who are watching right now, I'm kind of wanting to give all of you an idea of like, where our candidate sits here. Talking to him about how he feels about Donald Trump, whether or not he believes in universal health care, talking about labor rights issues. I think it's important for, when we're talking about sending someone to Congress, there are so many people in Congress right now that I feel like do not represent our best interests. So I want people to understand like where you stand on these issues as they're preparing to talk to their friends about you, talk to their family about you, if they're in Iowa thinking about voting for you, right? So, a couple more questions I wanted to ask you about that, kind of like to like go down the list of different kind of
Yeah.
issues that you might be addressing if you were to be elected to the U.S. Senate, particularly Roe v. Wade. Would you vote to, I guess, reestablish that, codify it into law? A lot of people are worried if that's ever going to be the case now. But if the Democrats are in control in the majority, would you vote to codify that back into law?
Without a doubt, yes, I am pro-choice. Here, I'll give you a personal story so people understand. This is on our website, but I'll just tell you it. Um, So last March, about a year ago. So I have two daughters. One's 18, and so she's soon to be 18. She's gonna love that
Yeah.
I said that. She's 17. The other is going to be 13 in about 20 days. I think she told me. Those are my children are with a previous marriage. My wife now, me and her do not have kids. She does not have kids. We got pregnant for the first time last year ever, and we were surprised by it, but it was a great thing.
Yeah.
And a month later, she lost it, and it was my first
Sorry to
experience
hear that.
ever dealing with that aspect of it, how hard it was on her physically but also emotionally on both of us, our families, because our families were
Yeah.
insanely excited. So it was a really hard thing. It's something she's still dealing with. and I'm here to support her every way, and it's hard. And then the election happened in November, and election night happened, and I looked over, and she was just bawling her eyes out, and I said,
Yeah.
why are you crying so much? And she said, because now we can't try again, because if we try again and we do something, we don't know the outcome, right? And she goes, I don't know if I'm going to be in danger, if the baby's going to be in danger. I don't know if I'll be called a criminal. I don't, all of these questions and things are floating around. And I realized really quick, for a lot of women across the country, a lot of women are going through that right now. And I think, Roe versus Wade has been a talking point for years for politicians. They've used it to get elected and not used it in our best interest to actually codify it and make it a right for women to have the option and that choice for them. And I think, not just abortion, not just Roe v. Wade, but I think when it comes to women's health, better accessibility across the state, especially in Iowa, more OBGYNs, more options for them, should be across the board. That's something that we should be doing all the time. And the fact that it hasn't been this way is a travesty. And now we're in the situation we're in because nobody wanted to codify it to begin with. And we need to get there. And I'm absolutely pro-choice, and I would definitely, if I could vote on it right now as a senator, I'd do it in a heartbeat.
I appreciate you sharing that story, especially with how personal it is. And I think you're absolutely right that there are so many, women in the country who just have no idea even what to do in this landscape, right? I mean, like, it feels so odd to just like have your body essentially like being told what you can and cannot do with your body, and some of them being treated like criminals because of it. I don't know. I personally can't stomach it. I wish that that had never happened in the first place. It's another one of those unfortunate um, I guess tales of elections have consequences, but
Yep.
unfortunately, that this is where we're at right now. Kind of going along a different little bit of a line here. Another really important issue for a lot of people, alongside of healthcare, bodily autonomy, climate change. They kind of roll right into bodily autonomy and healthcare, as far as I'm concerned. There has been kind of a back and forth debate, I think, especially more the Democratic Party, about how to even address climate change. Some people were saying that even talking about it is now like a negative thing. It's being seen as a perceived bad thing for the party. But there's also a lot of people who are within the party who are wondering why the hell it's so hard to get anything remotely done when it comes to addressing the climate crisis. But we talk about it every year about how the planet is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, and yet it feels as though people keep kind of like moving away from talking about it. I'm just going to assume that has something to do with the fossil fuel lobby. But, for you particularly, if you were elected, what is something that you would do in order to address all the different climate related issues that we're facing as a country?
That's a good question. I think I would, first of all, like I said, how about unions and working class, I'd bring them to the table.
Yeah.
Scientists and the people fighting climate change, or the people that know the most information about climate change, they should be the people that we're listening to and we're understanding. Obviously, like you mentioned, major corporations, fossil fuel industries, people like that, corporations like that are doing all they can to keep the money they're getting. They want that money train coming in. They're not, they don't want to go away from that. But I think evidence starts to show up. Like, you can sit there and be a science denier all you want. You can believe that this isn't going to happen or that is going to. Eventually, the evidence is going to show itself. Eventually, you're going to see for yourself. And I think we're starting to see that. Obviously, you're seeing more wildfires. You're seeing more intense winds. I think I saw something that said in Iowa or the Midwest this last spring was one of the windiest springs, if not the windiest spring on record. And you're seeing bigger storms, and you're seeing causation from that. You're seeing the polar caps melting away and causing more of the oceans to rise. So you're seeing things. It's just, if you want to believe them with your own eyes or not. It's easy to listen to politicians speak. I'm not a big fan of talking heads on TV, because a lot of the times it's just someone's opinion. I want to see data. I'm a former play-by-play sports. I know analytics. I want to see the data, and I want to talk to the people behind the scenes to understand what is actually happening. And I truly believe taking that information and making it in a way where people can actually understand it, as opposed to just listening to somebody speak from a scientific level, it's hard for working class individuals to necessarily understand the ins and outs of what exactly is going on and how it will affect them. But I think
Yeah.
there's ways that we can break it down to make it where these people can really understand how it's going to affect them personally. And once they start to understand it personally and how it's going to could potentially affect their lives personally, the cost of living, cost of groceries, cost of food, things like that, I think then we can actually start to see a little bit more progression towards climate change and action towards climate change. And I just wish, I don't know, I just wish more people would understand that science is not perfect. That's why it's science. It's continuously learning. They're continuously trying new theories and trying new things and trying to figure out, what it actually is that's happening. But I think that's who you talk to, is you talk to the people that are going through it every single day. That's part of their life, and understanding that they're trying their best to make sense of the data they're getting so they can tell us and share it with us. And I think that's where you would start, is bringing those scientists to the table and explaining it more. But in general, there's a lot of things you can do with climate change to make things better now. And I'm a proponent for clean vehicles, for clean air. In Iowa is the second leading state in the country for cancer rates, and I think a lot of that is the dirty air that we have and the dirty water that we have. It's corporations not doing their fair share to take care of us. And I just feel like that's the same way when it comes to climate change. They're going to continue to do what they can to make their profit.
Yeah.
And we have to bring evidence and supporting evidence and people who are fighting it every day to the table. And that's who I'm going to believe more than a politician any day of the week.
No, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I think one of the strong correlations that we are seeing between all these different subjects is the lobbying money that goes into Washington, D.C., right? It's the reason why something like, climate change can't actually, have any kind of meaningful movement towards it. It's the reason why we're having issues with labor rights, the reason why we're having
Yep.
issues with healthcare. I mean, you go through the list, everything kind of connects to it in one way or another. And we're also seeing that members of Congress are able to essentially profit off of these things on the back end. We're thinking about, like, this came up, just recently when we saw someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for instance, selling a bunch of stock, right before the crash happened earlier in May, and it kind of reignited the conversation of how all members of Congress need to be banned from trading stocks, from selling stocks, but their family members as well. Where do you fall into this issue? I personally feel as though no one in Congress should be able to buy stocks, trade stocks while they're members of Congress, and maybe for a few years afterwards as well. I mean, there is just too much like blatant corruption as far as I'm concerned. But how do you feel about this? Should there be a ban on stock trading?
150% agree with you. I think it's crazy. And I feel like what we saw recently with the tariffs going up and down and the stock market going up and down, and thoughts of insider trading here and there,
Yeah.
I think they're just playing with our lives, and it's insane. Like, that's again goes back to that 98% of Washington, D.C. is generational wealth. They're not going to feel the hit. We are, and they're
Yeah.
going to do whatever they can to continue to make the millions they make. And now they're just, it sounds bad, but they're just toying with us. And yeah, I don't think anybody who is in Congress is in an active seat like that should ever be able to yeah, they should be banned from it. I don't think they should be able to trade. I don't think they should be involved in the stock market. I think it's major conflict of interest, obviously, and I think it's crazy that it's going on. I'm actually shocked, like, that it's going on, like that it's not been banned already, or it has been allowed for this long, because it's just insane to me.
No, I could not agree more. And so I have a couple of quick like final questions for you.
Yeah.
I want to do these a little bit quicker here. First and foremost, we are seeing, I think, like a crisis of leadership with the Democratic Party. Recently I saw a Gallup poll come out that said that Americans' confidence in Democratic leadership is at an all-time low. This is also on the same weekend. Saw Chuck Schumer being on CNN, I believe, and he was asked about what's happening with Donald Trump right now, and one of his responses that he has was that he sent the president a strongly worded letter with 8 different things that he really wanted to see addressed. A strongly worded letter. And so, as someone who's trying to join the Democratic ranks, in Congress, what are your thoughts about what the Democrats need to do as far as going forward is concerned? Because whether they believe it or not, they have a crisis on their hands with how their own people feel about them, and I think there has to be a true reckoning with that.
It's always hard to question leadership. It's always very hard. And I can actually remember a time uh, I was in Kuwait. It's just a funny story. I was in Kuwait. We got there, it was 110 degrees outside. And one of my staff sergeants said, go out. I was a private or PFC or something. Goes, go outside and watch the gear, guard the gear in 115 degrees. And we're in Kuwait in the middle of a base. Like, to me at that time, I was like, there's no reason for that. It's insanely hot. And I remember saying, why? And I remember him, Staff Sergeant Q, I'll name drop him real quick. He said, because I said so, that's why. And for me, it's hard to question leadership. You grow up like that. You don't understand what those leaders are going through. You don't know where they are, who necessarily they answer to, all the issues. But I do believe as a leader in a time when you have a situation that's going on right now, you have to do more. You have to stand up more. You need to present yourself in a different light than, especially if you're trying to say that these times that we're going through are different than any time before. You need to do unprecedented measures. You need to do something different. I am not somebody that I feel like can question that leadership yet. I take every leader and understand who they are, what they're going through before I decide to understand, how I'm going to follow them. But at the same time, I think you just need to. There's more than you can do than write a letter. There's more than you can do to stand up and fight for what you believe in. And I think that's what the American people want. I think that's what Democrats want as far as a leader. They want someone to stand up and actually show that they're willing to fight for them. Now, again, that takes many different forms, but a letter or doing nothing or just saying that we're going to do something, people are seeing through that and they want results.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your answer on that one. And I think one of the final things I want to ask is kind of like going back to the question that we asked before about, stock trading, for instance. I think along that lines, it's also talking about influence in government, right? And there are a lot of different influences coming in and out of government right now. I think the one that feels the most, I guess, pervasive to me is that some of the influence that we are seeing from foreign governments, actually. One of the top of the minds comes to the AIPAC particularly, but there's also plenty of other organizations in the government or that are kind of lobbying the government. They're trying to get the bidding of their country done. So as a candidate, if you were to be elected, what how would you react to, I guess, these groups, these foreign government groups trying to lobby, you, for instance, in order to get legislation passed for them that they felt was more, I guess, favorable to them and their country? Would you take meetings with people like that? Would you not be taking meetings from people like that? Like, what would your stance be on dealing with groups like that?
So for me, the one thing that I'll always say is I represent, if I'm elected and able to get to there, I am representing Iowans and I am representing the working class Iowans and I'm representing all Iowans. So at the end of the day, my thought process and any leader's thought process or representation's thought process should be, how would this, or who am I meeting with, whoever it is, how would it affect who I'm representing? Is it going to benefit them? How is it going to benefit our country? Is it something that is going to make life better for Iowans? So that's the first thing I would be paying attention to. After that, after I get through that and understand how it's going to benefit us, then I'm going to do my research to understand, okay, where is this bad money? Is this people that I should definitely not be because they have a history of this, and that? And that takes time. And for me, I can't say that I'm not going to take a meeting. I have no idea. I'm not been presented with that yet.
Yeah.
But I think understanding how I would represent Iowans, how I'd represent working class is what at the end of the day, that's what I'm going to stay true to myself and go, okay, if this is not going to benefit Iowans, if this is not going to benefit our state, if this is something to benefit another group of people, then it's not worth my time. The major thing that I feel representatives should be doing every day of the week, every minute of the day is fighting for the people that they represent, because that's the only reason they're there, is because they were voted by those people. And I think I would listen to my constituents, listen to my people, and understand what they wanted out of their representative, and make that choice based off of what they want, not necessarily what I'm looking for or what I want. I think at the end of the day, you stay true to yourself by representing the people of Iowa and the people that voted you in.
Okay. Nathan Sage, I appreciate you coming on today. I feel we talked for a little bit here,
Yeah.
but obviously when it comes to, running for Congress, there are honestly dozens more issues that we probably could have talked about. more in detail, for instance. So, for anyone who's watching right now, if they would like to ask you a question or just talk to you in general, where can they like reach out to you so that they can kind of get more information from you?
Well, you can go to sageforsenate.com for sure. There's ways to donate, volunteer, but there's also you'll see a lot of events that we're going throughout Iowa, so they can come up to me at that time. You can also send me an email, Nathan@sageforsenate.com. Send me an email, let me know. But I really one thing about me is I'm a former journalist myself. I was a reporter. I was sports, all of that, and I rarely want to listen. I don't want to go around the state and just say, "Hey, we're going to do this. We're going to do that. We're going to do this." I know that I'm not smart enough to have every single answer for everybody. I think at the end of the day, you bring people to working class people to the table to be able to find the right answers, but also going out and talking to people, and they'll tell you. Iowans will tell you when they're mad. They'll tell you what's going on. Rural Iowans have no problems voicing their opinion,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm for. I want to listen. I want to understand, and send me all the information you can. Send me any question you have, and we'll figure it out, and we'll get back to you.
Okay. Well, we'll have some for those who are watching the playback on Substack, on YouTube. We will have some links in the episode description for where you can connect with Nathan at. I really appreciate you coming on today. I hope that we get to see you again in the future. And yeah, thank you so much. Good luck in your race next year, and we'll be kind of keeping tabs on you as the election cycle goes along.
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you in the next one.